Hello and welcome to A Shot in the Arm podcast. We're coming to you today from Munich, Germany at the 25th International AIDS Conference. And I'm pleased that we have with us this afternoon Meg Doherty, who's the Director of the Department of Global HIV, Hepatitis, and Sexually Transmitted Infections at the World Health Organization. She's been in that role since February 2020. Meg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining us. You know, you've had more than 25 years of experience in HIV, not just in Geneva, but also 10 years in low and middle income countries. You've advised ministries of health and international partners on implementing comprehensive HIV and infectious disease programs. And now in your role at WHO, you develop normative guidance and coordinate global efforts to address all those epidemics of HIV, viral hepatitis, and STIs. I'm sure this keeps you and your team pretty busy.
Very busy.
But let's start with a look at HIV. You know, this week, earlier this week, Winnie Byanyima of UNAIDS made a powerful case for the need for political actions by leaders this year. And if they act, she said, we can reach the goal of ending AIDS by 2030. If they don't, we're likely to fail as a global community. Some of the trends she mentioned, there's been an encouraging increase in the number of people on treatment from 47% in 2015 to 77% today. But there's still a quarter of the people who need treatment who aren't on it. New infections are rising in some parts of the world, in the Middle East, North Africa, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia and Latin America, which is worrying. There's a $9.5 billion gap in resources for addressing the pandemic. And there's also a worrying rise in stigma and discrimination about HIV and AIDS. So there's been progress, but also it looks like the glass is half empty. But, you know, I'd like to ask you, where do you see bright spots in the fight against AIDS these days? And what are some of the challenges that we still have to meet?
Well, thank you for having me here and having WHO here. And I think it's great that we have an opportunity to talk about sort of maybe the nuances and what's going well and what can go better. I think when we start to look at the report that was brought forward, there are some bright spots in the report and certainly some worrying trends. But the bright spots are that, you know, infections have gone down over a period of time. We've seen the reduction of new infections in Africa go way down. And it's unfortunate now that most of the new infections are happening outside of Africa. So we will have to perhaps spend more energy and more effort on working towards achieving our targets outside of Africa. And I think, you know, even if new infections and deaths have essentially stalled, it's not gone in the other direction. So that's a bright spot. I would also have to say that there are some efficiencies that we're finding in our programming so that we are, even if the money hasn't gone up, we've been able to cover many more people with treatment. And we know that the cost of HIV treatment, the one that's used in most of the world right now, the combination of tenofovir, lamivudine, and dolutegravir, is at an astounding price. In some countries, they're paying $40 or less, $35 for treatment for an entire year. That means we can do so much more in terms of reaching many more people. But I do think that there's also some bright spots in this conference and some super exciting research that came out that we all have heard around about the lenacapavir 6-monthly injection and showing 0 new infections in cisgender women. I think everybody wants to see the next studies come out in men. And also we know that they did something that we were hoping they would do. They allowed women to continue on the lenacapavir during pregnancy and breastfeeding. So we'll have a lot more information about this prevention modality than we've had about any other drug as soon as it goes forward to either the FDA or the EMA for regulatory authority. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, and Peter Piot observed earlier today that this could be as revolutionary if that new treatment is approved and if it reaches people quickly and affordably and equitably. It could be as revolutionary as the introduction of triple combination antiretrovirals was in the mid-90s.
No, I heard him say that as well. And I was aging myself a bit. I was in the audience in 1996 when we heard about all the studies of heart triple therapy. And you can imagine that researchers, communities, people working in this area were so excited about that news. So I guess we're getting the same sense of things are doable. We are going to potentially reach our targets. And if we don't reach our targets specifically, we're still making headway and we're saving lives, and people will be accessing better regimens for high quality life and care.
And that is good news. So that's it's good to hear that. Now, of course, as I said earlier, you're responsible not just for HIV programs, but also viral hepatitis and sexually transmitted infections. And together, those epidemics, if I remember correctly from your recent progress report, cause 2.5 million deaths a year, which is still a substantial amount of mortality. There's been progress there too, but also I guess it's fair to say that new infections are going up in both hepatitis and syphilis. In fact, if I remember correctly, there were 7 million people infected with syphilis. A couple of years ago, it's now up to 8 million, which is a pretty robust rate of change in the wrong direction. And also, in addition to the increasing number of deaths from viral hepatitis, some of the infections in HIV that we're also seeing, and there are comorbidities, obviously, you can tell us more about that in a moment. Among key populations, it's particularly troublesome. And by that, we mean men who have sex with men, people who inject drugs, sex workers, transgender individuals, and populations in prisons and other restricted settings. So why are we seeing those trends, and what is WHO doing with partners to get things back on track?
I think the answer there is complex about the trends, but let me start with hepatitis. Our new report, I think this is where I'm quite worried, because in hepatitis, we've had a strategy since 2016 to end the epidemics of hepatitis B and C. We've had a lot of input and a lot of collective work with partners, with WHO, to set out what are the numbers, to set out the pricing for the drugs for treatment for both hepatitis B as well as hepatitis C, supporting diagnostic companies to reduce the pricing of the diagnostics, and even working with countries on what we call either micro-elimination projects or initiatives to end hepatitis in their communities. And I would have to say our report showed for hepatitis B, only 13% know their status out of 250 million. For hepatitis C, out of 50 million people, maybe 30% know their status. So like with HIV, we have a know your status gap. People don't know they're infected. They're living with these infections. So it's it's really understandable that we don't have high levels of therapy and coverage of treatment. So we'd like to be able to shift that dynamic so that we can access those access prices. In our report, we talked about 10 countries that really need to move, and then we could really shift the dynamics on where we are with hepatitis. As a matter of fact, after I leave this meeting here, I'm headed to Pakistan. Well, Pakistan will be launching their presidential nationwide or prime minister-led nationwide initiative to eliminate hepatitis C. They'll start with, very much following in the footsteps of Egypt, where this past year they were certified for being on the path to elimination of hepatitis C. We need to generate some political capital and excitement around hepatitis. And I think when a couple of nations really do want to eliminate and have these presidential initiatives or prime minister initiatives, it will start to move other countries. So we're hoping that we can get that momentum going. The other area that has moved a little bit on the hepatitis B agenda is something we call triple elimination. So elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, hepatitis B, and syphilis. And we've seen 19 countries certified already, 2 countries now who are working towards that and have been certified on a path to elimination in Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. And I think with that sort of political, these are really important achievements politically and for populations, that will demand that, we need to see an integrated approach to bringing, if you're going to work towards elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, you need to bring along syphilis and hepatitis B at the same time.
Yeah, and of course, when countries in a region like the SADC region, the Southern African Development Community, see their partners like Botswana and Namibia achieve triple elimination, that gives them some hope that it can be done. I mean, it shows that this is possible, and there's also a certain amount of competition among countries, so that
Healthy
can help.
competition is always good if it spurs on better activities and better movement for the population.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about triple elimination and some of the things you said about the efforts around hepatitis and syphilis, that alludes to the question of integration, which was also a major theme of the conference. And I know that you presided over a session, a pre-conference meeting on integration of HIV, hepatitis, and STI programs into the health system more generally. Can you talk a little bit about why that's an important idea and what's being done about it?
Well, there are many reasons to think about both integration, or we tend to try to use the language around convergence, so that no one disease area is losing out, that there is going to be a sense of efficiencies and convergence on the systems that can deliver for people. And people often have many of the same infections or diseases at the same time. So it makes a lot of sense, that if you're going to test for HIV, testing for hepatitis and syphilis and or tuberculosis would make a lot of sense for the person. So it also supports a person-centered approach. The kinds of documents and the kind of guidance that we've put out have focused not only on the systems, what are the systems that need to be, capacitated to deliver on the HIV needs, the hepatitis, STI, and also working that in through a public health approach, so that if countries are moving their health, going through health reform and really strengthening their primary health care services, but their primary healthcare approach, that the diseases of HIV, hepatitis, and STI are brought into that in a meaningful way. So the systems, but also the services can deliver both multiple infections, at the same time, makes a lot of sense in terms of saving money, efficiencies, but also finding people where they are and when they need the services at the time that they're dealing with these.
And that also relates to, well, as you mentioned, countries are now putting more emphasis on sort of strengthening primary care and using that as an entry point to move toward achieving universal health coverage, which is another 2030 goal. And also in that context, another theme of the meeting this week has been sustainability of the response to HIV, hepatitis, and STIs. And, there's been a lot of conversation in the hallways and in the sessions about, health budgets are under pressure in many countries. We see all kinds of geopolitical tensions and conflict. Donors are distracted by that, by climate change, by migration, and other competing priorities. So how do you think about ensuring sustainability of the healthcare response, both in the diseases that you're most concerned with at WHO, but more generally, as we move toward universal health coverage? It just seems that at least the way that politicians are looking at these issues, there's not enough money, there are too many things to do. How are we going to square the circle?
Yeah, it does seem a bit overwhelming when you think about it. But I think it's important for us to know that there are many tools and many opportunities, and there are countries in the lead already looking at these hard questions. So how do we square all of this? I think, of course, we have multiple donors who have invested billions of dollars into the HIV response. And certainly we've come so far. That sustainability of all of those, 31 million people living with HIV on antiretroviral therapy, it's an ethical, moral requirement that those people continue on their treatment and lead long, healthy lives. And at the same time, if you think about it, all of us collectively as a group of I don't know, leaders and also people interested in this work, we also want to see that there can be acceleration to bring that other 9 million into treatment. So I think there's the ability now to start to say country by country, how are they thinking about sustainability? And we believe it will likely be different in every country and in every modality of the healthcare system. And one country may be at a place where they can bring HIV fully into the healthcare insurance program, and that will be a model that will work for that country. Another may need to, invest more heavily and take on all of their procurement of drugs, and they need to do that in a way where they're getting the best access to and prices. So I see sustainability as being stepwise, and we're going to have to monitor that over time. But certainly we have a moral obligation not to go backwards. And I think it's not going to be a single partner or a single government activity. It's going to be really a whole of government, whole of partners, support for the ministries of health and the ministries of finance in those countries who have been really heavily supported over the periods of 20 years with either PEPFAR or Global Fund. But it's not going to happen overnight. And so we have to plan for it and prepare for it.
Yeah, so what you're saying on the one hand is one size fits all isn't going to work, that we have to take each country's challenges as we find them and help them to find ways to address them. And then also countries, as we were just saying a few minutes ago, can learn from one another about how to do this. And I think that's where your department and WHO in general come in helping to disseminate best practices and show, model countries that have done things well and help other countries to see how they can learn from those experiences.
Not only do we have a document on how HIV and primary healthcare can find convergence, we're in the process right now of documenting case studies from countries who have looked at doing that and what it appears to be, what have they done to be able to either integrate or find convergence between these programs. So I think there will be a lot of sharing best practices as we move forward. And then also maybe some hard decisions on what are the essential services that need to continue and that have the most impact, and what are the services or things that have been funded over many, many years that haven't shown impact, and making some hard decisions in each country. But we're not there yet, I would have to say. We still need to build a greater coverage and a greater access. And perhaps with some of the new innovations that will come in around prevention, we may have fewer people who are going to need treatment in the future. And that's why we have to do this now, so that our sort of number needed to treat, I guess it is, the treatment needs don't have to increase over time, which would inevitably happen if we just stop where we're at now.
Yeah, sure. And one other way to express what you just said is that the costs of inaction are actually greater than the costs of action. Because if we don't prevent new infections, it means that countries' health systems are going to have to pay more down the road.
Very nicely said. I wish I said that.
So I have one last question for you, Meg, because I know you have other things to do. This is my 15th International AIDS Conference, and they have a certain character. So one of the things is that there are always demonstrations, and this one was no different. There was an interesting demonstration the other day about communities as experts, which I think resonated with the audience. Today I saw people toying about decriminalization of sex work, which is also another important issue. What are you going to remember most when you look back at this week in Munich?
Oh my goodness. There's so much important things that happen at this conference, and I think I'm going to remember, and that's maybe a little selfish, but to see that the guidance that we put out a couple of years ago to regulatory bodies and to researchers that they need to include pregnant and lactating people in research actually has led to lenacapavir studies, including pregnant and breastfeeding women in their studies, and then today having presentations on studies from Cab-LA to show that we can use Cab-LA safely in pregnant and lactating people. I think for me, that's my high point, even though there's so many others, because it shows, okay, if we do our job correctly and we bring and convene people around the table and we get the regulators and we get the researchers and we get the pharma, we can make a change much faster than we've made in the past. So it's that reducing the time to getting medicines to pregnant and lactating people, I think, is amazing.
Yeah, and it's not a trivial point. There were more than 5,000 women in the Purpose 1 trial, the lenacapavir trial, and there were more than 500 pregnancies during the course of the trial. So that was really important.
And I think we'll have data on 50 pregnancy outcomes soon, and then another 150 very soon thereafter. So I think in some ways, so many other things to mention, but this is what happened this morning, so it's top of mind.
Okay, well.
But I think it's important for women and for pregnant and lactating people that they had a voice here, and they made a change over this couple of years. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's an optimistic note on which to end. And so we wanted to thank you, Meg, for taking the time. And thank you all for joining us on a Shot in the Arm podcast. We'll be back again. We have more to come from Munich. And thanks for joining us.